Well, hi there, it's me again. I thought it would be useful to talk again about finishing enamels, and it's quite a big subject. It is the point at which anything you make can either be the very best it can be, or you can completely screw it up. So I'm talking particularly about finishing cloisonné, although it will apply, most of it will apply for champleve as well. So this is a piece I made many years ago, back when I first started. As you can see, it's cloisonné. It's actually on copper, and it's all done with opaques. And you can see how, although I've rubbed down to the silver wires to reveal them, the surface is still quite undulating. This was made before I understood about the importance of finally finishing a surface. I would have rubbed it down and I would have refilled the depressions. But a fire finish, when you actually just finish an enamel in the kiln, will always, the enamel will always rise up a little bit with the viscous around the wires and sink a little. And so you'll never get that really finely polished, perfect surface, which is what we're all aiming for. So I have over the years changed many and done it in many different ways. So I remember when I first did entered pieces for my selection at the Guild of Enamelers, I remember being told in one the comments that I needed a bit more pum and polish. I had not got a clue what pum and polish was. I didn't even, of course it stands for pumice, and a lot of traditional enamelers use pumice with a wet in a wet drip machine, and it drips water and it polishes fairly slow. It works brilliantly and it is horrendously messy. And there's no way I've got room for that kind of messy setup in my very tiny studio, or actually anywhere else in the house. The family are going to complain. So I needed to do it in other ways. So for many years I would, after I had got to the top of the wires on my piece, then I would stone it back with diagrit. And then I would finish with successive grits of wet and dry paper, 400, 600, 800, and finally 1200. And if you do that properly, each time crossing the grits so you don't wear grooves in it, and you each time should remove all the previous lines, you will get a very nice soft satin finish, not completely shiny, but a very nice acceptable finish. And that, as I say, that goes to 1200. We can do, I usually go more than that now, but that was a lifesaver for me, because when I was doing sort of mainly fossily pieces, actually a soft finish like that, it was very acceptable and I could achieve very good looking results. And nobody need know that I couldn't actually go any shinier. So I think this piece here that I'm wearing, which I made many years ago, that would have been finished like that. It's beautiful. It's not very shiny, but it has a beautiful, lovely, this beautiful soft finish, which is what I'm always aiming for. This particular piece was done on silver foil and copper. And whilst it gives a beautiful effect, and I wear this necklace so often and I always get comments on it, I never do cloisonné on silver foil anymore. And the reason for that is because if something goes wrong, and you know, with any enamelling, any process probably, mistakes happen, things don't go perfectly, and the difference between it being, oh dear, never mind, I'll start again, to being finishing to be really beautiful, actually is being able to correct it, knowing what you can do when something goes wrong. And when you're doing on silver foil, actually there's not that much you can do very often. I mean, if a colour goes in the wrong place, or I end up with a bit of grit, which happens quite often, then I will just drill it out with a fine diamond burr, a bit of water, scrub it with a glass brush under running water, and I'm good to go, and the problem's been sorted. But when you're doing on silver foil, with the layers being so thin, once you've gone through the silver foil, that's it. You can't sort it. Nothing you can do. And ask me how I know this. The hard way, like everything. Now, this piece here, I made in 2019, and it's got a good finish on it. There are imperfections, and with this piece, I learnt so much. Like all the best pieces, it didn't go the best, and it did go wrong. It was beautifully and vibrant, very much. The colours very much more like the piece I actually won my silver award for with the 2020 Goldsmiths Craftsmanship and Design Awards. But this time I made a mistake on the finishing. I managed to put some grooves in it which I could not get through without refilling, and then it turned out it needed another, I don't know, half a dozen firings. It already had a lot, and in that time, to be honest, the colours faded, and not as brilliant as they should have been. And then it had a few other things happen to it as well. I managed to mess it up when I was setting, and there is actually a very, very slight crack, which I've sort of covered over. A little bit of gold leaf, tiny bit of epoxy to stabilize it, and it's great, and I wear it. Obviously I could never sell it, but it's a piece I've learnt on, so that's all. So all is good. Now this piece, this is a very recent piece, and you might be able to see that there's a very slight difference in the colour depth there. I was finishing this with my jewel tool, which is how I usually start. When you're making a piece like this and there aren't so many wires all the way over, it's very easy to make a mistake and go a little bit too deep in where the wires aren't there to guide you. And that's what I did with this. So I was doing my jewel tool and I did all the early stages, like I said in the first video. And I went too faint, and so I could see a light purple, so then when I was filling in any little depressions, there were a couple of other depressions. I think I was impatient and I wanted to get it all done without having to do any refilling. Big mistake, easy mistake to make, don't do it. So I put a little bit more purple in there, and although I have achieved a beautiful finish and it feels perfectly smooth, after that I couldn't finish it by machine. It had to have hand finishing, because I had to take account of the history of the piece, where things hadn't gone completely right. And that's something that really you can only get with experience, but you can bring it back. I did it with Diagrits, and then my favourite polishing sticks from Cookson's, or I could have used the wet and dry papers, going up to 1200, and then I think I used diamond paste after that, which, although they're all measured in microns, I've used a converter to convert them to grits, so that and I have a list, so I know how, what micron to use in what order and how they fit in with the grits. Because obviously it's very important that if you've got up to 1200 and it's all looking good, you don't want to suddenly go a little bit coarser than that, because you're going to put deeper scratches in than you have already. And polishing is very much, when you're polishing enamel, you are always putting scratches in, but finer scratches than the stage before, so that they cover over the previous ones. And the finer you go, you can end up with a beautiful finish, and a beautiful polished, fine, smooth, even finish. That's as good as you could get from a kiln, but better because there's no slight undulations around the wires. This is a piece, one of those rare beasts that did actually go perfectly. And I finished it entirely with my jewel tool. And I will put a link on the bottom of here where you can jewel tool. They have wonderful videos about using it to finish enamel, and they do it very well. And I don't propose to repeat it. But this one I went, because the wires are all the way over, and probably I was a little bit more with it and awake. I made sure not to go too far at any stage, and I stopped as soon as I had a number of depressions all the way round, which I could then refill and then do it again. And it's very satisfying when you manage to do a piece all the way through, and starting with the coarse, medium, fine, super fine, and then finally the cerium oxide wheel, which did take a lot of practice to use, but does actually work now. You just have to use it very, very, very carefully, very, very gently, very slow speed. It's very easy to rip it, so make sure you don't catch any edges with it. Okay, so I hope that is just giving you a little bit more guidance and a little bit more clue, and I'd be very happy to answer questions if you have any. It's difficult to, finishing is one of those things that comes with experience, and the more you do, the more you know, and the more you can put right when something doesn't go entirely perfectly. And hey, life doesn't. And with enameling, and like anything, it's a rare piece that goes 100% perfectly all the way through. They do happen, but quite often actually you have to bodge it, sort it out, and correct it. And happily, with experience, you work out, if I stick a little bit more enamel there, and make sure I don't rub, be careful how I rub down just there. And maybe if I did it by machine, it would have to be totally 100% flat and even all the way. Whereas by doing it by hand, maybe it's slightly thicker there, slightly higher, but it doesn't notice, and you can't feel it, and it all looks good. But it happened, and it's there, and that enabled me to have a fraction more of the purple that I needed. Okay, so hope that makes sense, and happy enameling. And if you've liked it and you find it's really, really, really been helpful for you, then if you want to make a small contribution, I've included a link. At the moment, I'm not doing paid for videos, but maybe in the future, who knows. But thank you for listening.